see Jesus? Where are those witnesses who can confirm this incident? Where are these names? We are told after Paul saw Jesus, he went to Damascus. He met a man there named Ananias. Correct me if I... Ananias. That's Jesus also appeared to this man and told him that Paul is coming to you, as I appointed Paul as disciple of mine to take my teachings forward. So who is this man, Ananias? Today we don't know him, and we don't have any writings by him, to testify that yes, Jesus appeared to me and told me, yes, Paul is a genuine teacher. We don't have that testimony. We don't have proper testimony that Paul was a true disciple of Jesus. Time out? Okay. Is that all?
Dr. Peter Barnes will now speak for 10 minutes.
Mustafa's raised three things. Firstly, the view of Christ. Secondly, the view of the law. And thirdly, the cross. I'll go to the law. I'll go to the second one first, because I think this can be explained, and can be explained so it makes good sense. I think there is in the Old Testament moral law. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, and so on. That's moral law. And there is ceremonial law, circumcision, sacrifices, and so on. And the Old Testament says the moral law is above the ceremonial law. So, for example, Samuel tells Saul it's better to obey than to sacrifice. And perhaps Saul might have said, well, you know, to sacrifice is to obey. That's what it's about. But he says, no, there's a hierarchy. Better to obey than to sacrifice. Mustafa said that Paul vacillates between do we uphold the law and do we not uphold the law. Can I say, even if you wanted to uphold the law, and I'm talking about the Old Testament law now, that's what he means. That given in the Old Testament, it cannot be obeyed, even if you wanted. There's no temple now. It's been destroyed. The Romans destroyed it in AD 70. There's no temple to carry out the sacrifices. There are no priests now. Nobody knows, if you're a Jew, what tribe you're from. The priests came from the tribe of Levi, and nobody knows who's from the tribe of Levi now. People know whether they're Jews or not, but they don't know whether they're from the tribe of Levi. There are no priests. There have not been priests for all these years since AD 70. There might have been some sacrifices for a little while after, but it's petered out. It's gone. You cannot keep the Old Testament law now. So the temple is gone, the sacrifices are gone, the priests are gone. So that part of the law simply cannot be kept. And of course, from the Christian point of view, there is no need for it to be kept. There's no warrant for it to be kept, because Christ is our great high priest, who is also the sacrifice. He is both. He is the temple. He says to the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4, she says, should we be worshipping in Jerusalem or up in the mountain here, Mount Gerizim, where the Samaritans worshipped? And Jesus said, well, the Jews got it right, salvation is of the Jews, but it's not going to matter, because the hour is coming and now is, and it's the Messiah who's come. And he is the temple, he is the sacrifice, he is the great high priest. He fulfills the Old Testament law in that sense. So the moral law continues for the Christian. The ceremonial law finishes. That in short, in just 5 minutes or so, is a summary of how to deal with it. And circumcision is an everlasting covenant. Circumcision is a sign of the everlasting covenant. The Acts 15, which deals with the 4 stipulations from the Council of Jerusalem, is quite right. They're there, I think, and some of them are permanent, some of them are temporary. But if you go back to Acts 10, Peter has a vision. And he has a vision of a sheet coming down from heaven containing all kinds of 4-footed animals. And a voice told him, get up, Peter, kill and eat. And he refuses. Because, I mean, if your background is steeped in this, I mean, my background is Gentile, not Jewish, so But if your background is steeped in this, you know, if you're a Muslim, particularly, and circumcision and the food laws are part of the wolf of the way you think about things, it's not easy to move from one position to another. And Peter objects here as a Jew. He says, I have never eaten anything impure or unclean. He came back to Leviticus 11 and he's saying, I could not break that, surely. You know, that's God's law. I'm not that keen on eating something that God classifies as an unclean animal. And the voice spoke to him, do not call anything impure that God has made clean. And so Peter then goes on to admit into the church Cornelius, who is another centurion, who is another Roman, who is an uncircumcised Roman. And the breakdown of the food laws is the breakdown of the division between Jews and Gentiles. For Jews who believe that Jesus is the Messiah and Gentiles who believe the same thing, that they now can eat together. And that's how Peter understands it. That's how Christ fulfills Old Testament ceremonial law. Mustafa quoted Galatians 2:9 and says, well, this is just Peter. This is just Paul's saying that he extended the right hand of fellowship to Peter, James, and John. And they extended it back to him. 2 Peter very certainly is written by Peter. Just very quickly, the one argument the critics have is 1 Peter is written in very elegant Greek. 2 Peter is written in fairly rough Greek. The whole New Testament is written in Greek originally. But 1 Peter chapter 5, I think, is the answer to that, because verse 12, Peter says that with the help of Silas, Silas is Silvanus, it's the same man, whom I regard as a faithful brother, I have written to you briefly, encouraging you and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand fast in it. And I think there's your explanation. His elegant Greek comes from Silas, Silvanus. He comes from a man who did better in these Greek classes than Peter did. And 2 Peter is Peter by himself, where the Greek's a bit rough. That is the only argument they have, essentially, and it's not a good one. 2 Peter is written by Peter. It's not just 2 Peter 3 saying that Paul's our beloved brother. It's all these other people that we don't know so much about. Titus and Barnabas and Mark, Silas, Silvanus too. These people who were connected with Peter and connected with Paul. And they weren't seeing that as a discrepancy, that they're going from one side to the other, and there's a conflict here, I'm riding two horses at once. They don't see it like that. It's all part of the one movement. Yes, there's different personalities and all the rest of it, but they're all preaching the same gospel. So I hope that clarifies things as far as the law is concerned. And the Christian view of the law, I think, quite coherent. You can muddy the waters if you want to, but it's quite clear if you just look at what's there. The view of Christ. Mustafa was saying that the view of Christ is a low view, expression used in Matthew, Mark and Luke, and it gets a lot higher in John and is there in Paul, a high view of Christ. Let me read from Mark. Mark 12, verses 35 to 37, and this is a quote from the Old Testament. And that's a high Christology from the Old Testament. Psalm 110, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make all your enemies your footstool. Mark quotes that, and he's saying, this is it from the Old Testament. The Messiah is called Lord. And so Jesus says, David himself calls him Lord, how then can he be his son? Of course the answer is he's both. The Messiah is David's son. He's descended from David, humanly speaking, and he's David's Lord. He's both at once. And they can't answer him because that never occurred to them. They're just baffled by what he said. But that is a high Christology, isn't it? That's a high view of Christ there in Psalm 110, quoted there in Mark, which is supposed to have a low Christology. And that's Jesus himself. Jesus, let me get another one. If the Sermon on the Mount is supposed to be, simple stuff, and this is the original Jesus before Paul turned him into the Lord from heaven. Look at in Matthew chapter 7. This is a Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord.